The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the speakers or authors and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by the producers of this broadcast. The material herein is for entertainment purposes only.
Welcome to another episode of Scary Stories with Kalila. Tonight you've got me, Kalila Smith, coming to you live from New Orleans, and my co-host for the evening, Allan Gilbreath, coming to us live from Memphis. Welcome, Allan.
Good evening.
How's it going?
We're good.
And we got a special show
tonight.
Yes, we got a special show tonight because I did one of these shows on Scariest Paranormal, and it was just amazing. Had a gentleman on the show by the name of Calvin Parker, who in the 1970s had an actual experience, and this is all documented. He was abducted by aliens on the Pascagoula River. Stop it, Allan. And stop it. He was abducted by aliens. He and another gentleman, he wasn't by himself, while they were fishing on the Pascagoula River in the 1970s. And many years later wrote a book about it. He had had numerous experiences beyond that. And finally, shortly after I did a podcast about his experience in interviewing Mr. Parker, the original police file, the recording from the police station when he and his buddy went to the police station to report what they had been through, has resurfaced now on the internet. So it's kind of a big deal. And, just when, all of this is going on, I happened to see this little spot the other day. And I've seen where famous people like to talk about UFOs and some of their experience of what they believe in all, and had even written about Jackie Gleason's experience in my book, Miami's Dark Tales. And he was a very adamant person who was involved in paranormal and UFOs and so forth. And he had a wonderful experience, oddly enough, with President Nixon, of all people, who supposedly brought him to a place, picked him up. They were golf buddies. These guys played golf together. They were golf buddies in South Florida. And Jackie Gleason is in bed one night. He gets a telephone call, and it's Richard Nixon. He's like, come on, I'm going to take you somewhere. Come on. And he's got a car waiting out front, and Jackie Gleason gets up, gets dressed, he gets in the car. He gets taken to this military base, a naval base down in Miami, and he is brought to a section of this naval base, and they revealed to him, I think there were three bodies of little gray men, your typical alien-looking creatures that were in this room in a naval base. And Jackie Gleason took that story to the grave with him. He swore it happened. He was very adamant about it. He never changed his story. And up until the day he died, he claimed that it truly happened. Well, lo and behold, another celebrity has emerged on YouTube from the past, from, again, the 1970s. The greatest, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali on the Johnny Carson show.
Yep, I remember that episode.
This is when he was getting ready to have a fight. They brought these guys out, and it was so hilarious because Muhammad Ali, he was such a humble guy. The guy's so humble. And he comes out, he's got a robe on. He says, this is kind of weird that I'm coming out here dressed in a robe. And he had, I can't remember the other fighter's name. What was that fighter's name that he was with? Do you remember?
Remember.
It was a big one. I think this is when Muhammad Ali won the world championship. But Muhammad comes out, and then the other gentleman, he had been talking about the fight, and they asked Muhammad Ali about the fight, and he comes out of left field with, I know that I've seen a lot of UFOs, and I know other people have seen a lot of UFOs, and I'm just kind of curious why nobody wants to talk about it. And it was just the most bizarre thing. So I coerced Allan into, let's do a show about UFOs. Let's talk about this, Allan. Let's chat about this, because Allan is our skeptic. Allan doesn't believe anything ever. And I want to see, and I told him you cannot debunk Muhammad Ali. You can't do it. You
Yeah,
can't.
you
You
can.
can't do it.
Yeah, you can.
You really can't. So, well, neither him nor Jackie Gleason are here to defend themselves, and neither is Mr. Calvin Parker. But
Well-
anyway, we're going to talk about UFOs, alien abductions,
Yes.
and all of these things, because those can be scary. Imagine you are minding your own business. You're on a fishing trip, or you're lying in bed, you're going to sleep, and you hear something in your room, and it's not just a face in the window. You see a light outside, and you go to the window, you go look out the window, and the next thing you know, you're being transported somewhere else. Now imagine, you probably think you're dreaming. I would think I'm dreaming.
You're hoping you're dreaming.
You're hoping you're dreaming. You're transported somewhere else. You're taken aboard a ship, and you wake up in some sort of, the scenario is usually some sort of medical situation. Now that's pretty scary. I mean, come on, Alan. Everybody, I don't know anybody that looks forward to going to a medical procedure.
No.
And the older I get,
I've recently been through quite a few, so
yeah, you've been through
nobody
more
got
than
up
me,
that
and I
morning
just
and went,
won't.
"Yay!
That's my biggest fear, because I stayed very healthy, until my body started falling apart when I got older. But I was one of these people who went to the doctor once a year, and I was like, okay, I'm good, I'm done. But that's a huge fear for me, is to have some sort of horrible medical experimentations done, and painful medical procedures being done, tests being run on you, and being totally awake and cognizant of it. And to me, that's a terrifying thought. And I can only imagine how terrified somebody would be going through this. It's a very scary thing, and it's very appropriate for this show. And there's nobody else I would rather have this conversation with than that guy right there. So let's go, Alan. Let's talk a little bit about, what are your thoughts about this? People, there was especially a period in time, especially 70s and 80s, people saw UFOs. And, I wrote about it with Miami, because Miami was infamous for it. There were constantly things coming off. And of course, it's right there by the Bermuda Triangle. So I'm thinking, there's a portal right there. There's a portal, and maybe to me, rather than something from another planet, I'm thinking more interdimensional kind of stuff going on.
Wow.
Yeah, I took it. I've always believed that. I've always thought, maybe it's not from another planet per se, but from another dimension, and that maybe there's a portal opening up, and what we're seeing and experiencing are things coming from interdimensional beings.
5 years ago, I'd have poppycocked that. I'd have looked at you and gone, "Oh, gee,
and you
here we
probably
go."
I think you did a couple of times.
I probably did. We were on stage
you did quite a few times.
However, these days, dimensional quantum mechanics is stating that there could very easily be, or at least mathematically provable, that there could be alternative dimensions.
That's right.
But before we go there, before we make that leap, let's go back to around 1880, 1890, when in Lubbock, Texas, of all places, we have one of our first verifiable UFO sightings.
Wow.
And the UFO that was sighted back then was more described as a dirigible than so much a flying saucer. So, when we began having these unusual sightings in the sky, we actually got to go back to Indian paintings, hundreds, if not thousands of years old, and we've got spacecraft flying around in those.
Exactly, ancient astronauts. There you go. Yeah, they talk about it in the Old Testament. There's references to spaceships of some type.
Well, how much of that is poetic license? How much of that is metaphorical? And how much of it have we lost as we've discussed earlier, We've discussed things like folklore and Grimm's fairy tales, and Lord knows you and I have argued over enough topics. And we all know that topics shift and change with time as points of reference shift and change.
Exactly.
So if you had been in the South Pacific when Krakatoa blew up, you know, even if you didn't see the volcano, you felt the explosion, the ocean honestly, bizarrely changed underneath your craft. You heard this explosion. The skies themselves looked like they were burning. I don't care who you were in that time and age when Krakatoa blew up, if you were with any visual range of it, you were instantly converted. You became religious at that moment.
Sure.
You found a deity and you began praying to it that you were going to get home. So, you know, we just have this event that is probably beyond human comprehension for the average person at that time. And I love picking on Krakatoa because it was witnessed. You know, there were boats close enough to it to kind of go, geez, the volcano blew up. And, you know, we had people witness it that knew that it was a volcano that blew up. However, you know, the effects of Krakatoa were felt around the world. And back then, we didn't have television and internet and radio and all these wonderful ways of communicating. So by the time the word got back that Krakatoa, the volcano, blew up, can you imagine the urban legends that had begun?
Yeah.
As to what actually happened?
Of course, yeah.
So I think that's a great leaping off point for getting really into this.
Yeah. Well, hold that thought, and we'll take a little break, and when we come back, we'll delve a little deeper into it.
Submitted for your approval. New Orleans. Seductive, magical, mysterious, and haunted. There is no place on this earth with as much ghost and vampire activity as New Orleans. Imagine, if you will, a tour that takes you to sites in the French Quarter of actual documented hauntings. The Haunted History Tour is just that tour. Every day, every night, all year round. This tour has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN, and it's available to you. Are there ghosts and vampires in the French Quarter? Find out by taking the tour that everyone is talking about, the Haunted History Tour. For more information, call Haunted History Tours at 861-2727. That's 861-2727. This is not a Halloween spookhouse. This is real.
All right, we are back. So, Alan, you've got me enthralled, and I love it. I love it. I love when we argue. Don't get me wrong. I love when we argue, and when we've been opposed on these subjects. You know, skeptic versus believer for years now. You know, for over 10 years we've been doing this, and you know, it's fun. I love it. But I also love those rare occasions where Alan says, "I'm going to give it to him. I'm gonna go with this." So I'm very intrigued that this guy here is going, okay, there's some explanations for this. So I'm gonna let you have the floor, Alan. Go for it.
There's, you know, as we love to say, in every good story, there's, especially like UFOs. The UFO is the perfect I don't know what happened story. Because nothing basically touched the ground. It's something you saw anomalously. You couldn't touch it. You couldn't shoot it. And let's go back in time. I mean, let's face it. In the Wild Wild West, if something looked weird, you took a pot shot at it just to see what it was. You saw a pink bear, you shot it. You found it had algae. Oh, well, it's not a pink bear after all. So, you know, we're not, you know, as an exploratory species, we're not the nicest people to bump into sometimes. So here we have the strange craft in the sky. And keep in mind, that plays so into the human psyche of fear. Because there's always some crazy person doing something. And I'll even pick on the Wizard of Oz. What is the single most feared thing in all of Oz? The one thing nobody wants to see coming. And it's winged. It's the winged monkeys. Nobody wants to. Well, but see, because we can't fly, we don't worry about things that drive, run, roll, swim. We freak out if it can fly. Because that's the one thing we can't catch. You know, honestly, if you're on the ground and it can fly, there's nothing you can do about it.
It's true. That's true.
You're out on this fishing trip. You're in your boat. It's evening time. You've caught fish. Life is good. It's time to go back to camp. And now we see something in the sky. You can't escape it. What are you going to do? I think it's following me. Well, then you're looking for something reassuring. Do I hear the sound of a helicopter? If I hear the sound of the helicopter, I'm fine. It's just the police, you know, maybe looking for an urban legend lunatic that got loose from someplace. Who knows? But then you need something to reassure you. And if you don't get something to reassure you, again, now you're at its mercy. You can't escape something that can fly. So if you go back to World War I, World War I was the first time flight had something to do with the battlefield. But can you imagine being that poor little farmer out in your field and seeing an airplane go over for the first time?
I'm sure it was pretty disturbing to that person. I can get that. Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about that? It's this horrible roaring noise you've never heard before. You're looking around on the ground for something, and you end up looking up, and here's this thing going through the air. And heaven help if you happen to be in an area where there's a skirmish, there are a lot of things flying around up there in the air. So our helplessness on the ground is magnified. And then you add social stresses. Because my problem with the average UFO is that apparently they can make it through hundreds of millions of miles of space, but they can't park the thing. Nobody can parallel park, and they run into the planet. It crashes, it wrecks. It's, I have a real problem with that. You were good enough to get here, but you forgot to change the oil. It's really... But there's so many references. We can't have all of these references throughout history to bizarre sights in the sky. Now, are we talking meteorites? Are we talking, something flaming in the sky? Was there something living up there we don't have anymore that's gone extinct? Did we
usually
have...
They have lights. They usually talk about very bright lights and something in the sky, but they usually describe it as hovering, kind of something that would just hover over.
What about an airborne jellyfish with lights and luminescence? All right, that's no crazier an idea than throwing in an interdimensional something that is slumming to Earth. Because, did we once upon a time have, now keep in mind, there's lots of legends of star jellies and slimy things falling out of the sky. We've got centuries of those reports.
Oh, they really? I missed that. How did I miss that?
Yeah, all you got to do is look up star jellies. So I'm going to start completely out in left field, and let's say, was there something biological that we have now wiped out? I don't know. But many of the reports, like especially the tapestries in India, report big craft with people in them and roaring sounds and flame bursting out of it. Well, that sounds like a rocket ship, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. Now, where would they get that impression that back then, having not seen one?
Well,
having never seen that, where would these things come from? Because they're on Indian tapestries, they're in cave drawings, they're on old transcripts. I mean, they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
They're illuminated in scripts. Yeah.
So how do you explain this? How do you explain it?
Well, one thing is that humans today are not any smarter than we were 1,000 years ago. I recently got in this discussion with a young man who was trying to convince me that the modern human was infinitely thousands of times smarter than we were a few hundred years ago. And I looked at him and I said, I have a funny feeling we've lost ground. Now, we have smarter stuff, but people that lived 1,000 years ago were not sitting around complaining, wow, I wish somebody would invent a refrigerator. I'm tired of being primitive. So as we go back through history, we have to kind of lose that arrogance that, well, 1,000 years ago, how could they have made a balloon? Same way we would now, sew a bunch of stuff together, put gas in it, and see if it went up.
But where would they have gotten the gas?
Natural gases exude everywhere. Anybody paying attention to the natural world could have made these discoveries. And we've lost so much information to history. We remember people like Mozart and Shakespeare, but there are 1,000 other musicians or 1,000 other writers that weren't that popular or disappeared, or luck said their cache of manuscripts caught fire. I mean, Lord only knows what we lost when repositories of knowledge got burned down by somebody. There could have been instructions on how to build a dirigible 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And let's face it, if you had a natural source of helium, or worse, hydrogen, and that thing blew up, it'd make a roar. We think of something like the La Brea tar pits, poisonous gases, but they're hot and they're rising. Somebody figured out smoke rises, so you filled a bag with smoke, and sure enough, the bag would rise. There's ancient rites. I'm going to look you dead in the eye and go, they're ancient rites over funerals, pardon me, of where we would put a candle in a bag and light the candle, and the little candle would illuminate the bag, and thus you were celebrating somebody's spirit rising up and floating away. So the principle is not horribly unknown. So I want to start with losing the modern arrogance that the technology couldn't have existed. Maybe not the way we would interpret it, but technology did exist. If they could fly a kite, they could figure out flight. Now, we didn't figure out motorized flight until the Wright brothers, but at certain points, certain discoveries become inevitable. So here we are with these UFOs floating around. We don't really know what they are. We have all kinds of stories. We can get into angels. We can get into Nephilim. We can get into interactions with otherworldly creatures, if you wish. which would be in line with a UFO landing. So, were the ancient gods, to quote a popular TV show, were the ancient gods actually astronauts or not? We don't know. Popular culture has a lot of fun with that stuff. So, could there have been technology for some answer to UFOs? Dirigibles, something that floated, something that went up in the air, something unexplained? Probably and absolutely. But that doesn't answer everything.
All right, well, let's come back from a little break, and we'll see if we can at least try to answer a little bit.
Step beyond the veil that separates our world from the world of spirits with me, Kalila Smith, as we uncover the mysteries of the afterlife. This is a spiritual journey as we try to discover if life really does continue after the physical death. Are after-death communications real, or do we imagine them? Get my book, Afterlife Mysteries Revealed, and find out. Afterlife Mysteries Revealed, available on Amazon.com by Kalila Smith.
Okay, welcome back. So, Alan, let's delve a little bit more into this thing, because I was really intrigued. I mean, a lot of these people, people go, oh, well, maybe the guy was drinking, maybe this, maybe that. But there was such sincerity with Muhammad Ali. He was so innocent looking when he said, everybody sees it. Why aren't we talking about this? And he truly, in his heart of hearts, you could see this guy was not making this up. He's on national television. He's getting ready to fight for the heavyweight championship. He's supposed to be talking about boxing, and he is sincere. He's not trying to be funny. I mean, the guy truly was trying to express his thoughts about some of these things that he was trying to make sense out of. So, I mean, how do you dispute that?
Well, you can't. This is where you and I have to look at each other and agree for once. You cannot tell somebody you didn't have an experience. You can't look at the poor fisherman. They fish out of the river and he goes, I don't know what just happened to me. Obviously, this person had an experience. Most of the time, it's pretty traumatic. But if we go back to the 50s, let's ease back into just after World War II. They're still decoding all of the Nazi information. And as horrible as that whole period of history was, there is an even worse side of it. And the worst side of it is any type of science or biology or physics without ethics. If we are losing soldiers on the Russian front and we need to figure out frostbite, well, instead of performing what we would consider modern science, they had no ethics about this. They just went and got somebody out of the prisoner tank. They threw them in a snowbank until he froze. Then they tried to figure out how to unfreeze him. So, I don't think there can be anything scarier than that complete lack of any form of ethics having to do with research. So we just finished World War II. We're getting into now the Cold War. So the Soviet Unions were getting into atomic weapons. World War II ended because we did something truly horrifying. We bombed a couple of cities. We took a theory, we took a physics problem and made it a very terrifying reality. So if you look at the cheesy movies of the time, them, giant ants affected by radiation, a 50-foot tall woman, people turning into gorillas, or, everything had some kind of horrible twist to it. But here's the fun part. All of these militaries are also trying to develop weapons, technology. We're really getting into a technological race, and they're all trying to cover up what they're doing. So blatantly lying and doing anything you could to cover it up is now a big part of our culture, and we're just now finding a lot of this stuff out 40, 50, 60 years later. You know, they're declassifying information, and, well, as a matter of fact, we were building the stealth bomber back then, and it did look like a spaceship from a certain angle. And if you did happen to see it, well, we made you look like a kook by doing crazy stuff to you so that our enemies wouldn't know what we were building. And think about all the other governments around the world doing the exact same thing. So it muddies your UFO waters even more. Because do I honestly believe Muhammad Ali or the fabulous one, Jackie Gleason, or many of these other people at the time that said, hey, I saw one of these things. Did they see it? I'm going to look you dead in the eye and say, yes, they did. Now, what they saw, that's the hard part to argue. Was it a military aircraft? Was it something experimental? Was it something they weren't supposed to see? And a lot of people, as Muhammad Ali mentioned, this was gaining ground back in the 70s. People were seeing more and more weird stuff in the sky. Vietnam was going on. The problems with Russia were going on. None of this stuff happens in a vacuum. I mean, we'd love to go back and say, hey, 1972, we saw something weird in the sky, but there was nothing else going on that week that would have mean how something weird got in the sky. And, you know, I'll relate my one Florida experience. You know, while doing some shows down in Florida, doing some work down there, one of the big things is being on the beach in the evening, watching the sunset. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's almost a religious experience. But I discovered two camps that sat on the dunes actually really close to each other. And one of them was all of the kind of retired guys from the local military base sitting over there on their lawn chairs with their beverages and their little military tattoos and their little hats as to, you know, what division they were in or what, you know, identified themselves. And as aircraft would begin flying over in the dusk, they would tell you what airplane it was, what make, what model, and probably who tuned it up. Because they worked on the base. This was their equipment. And occasionally, just to prove their point, a plane would fly over, not like doing what it's not supposed to do, and give them a little wing waggle, like, hey guys, how y'all doing? And fly off. But yet one dune over was the section I affectionately called the foil heads, because they were the UFO watchers. And the exact same dot in the sky would come across. The gentleman on the right would tell you who made it, where did it come from, and who's probably flying it. The crew on the left started snapping pictures and telling you this was proof that they were here. And, you know, and it would just be a light in the sky. To me, it was obviously an airplane. But, you know, it's because I'm sitting here with the guys on the right telling me it's obviously an airplane. But if you divorce all of that from it, and let's get to the truly anomalous stuff, the things nobody can describe, and even the Pentagon has this in the last few weeks released pictures. They said, we have no idea what this is.
Really?
So to give full credit to UFO investigations, even the Pentagon in the middle of all this mess, I guess they figured nobody would notice. Released pictures, and they go, we don't know what the heck this is. So, do we have verification of an actual unidentified flying object? Yes. We don't know where it's from. We don't know who made it. We don't know what dimension, planet, or country. And I'm betting on country. But Have we had UFO experiences? Yes. Have UFOs become part of our culture? Yes. Did Richard Nixon show Jackie Gleason something that night? I'm positive he did. Because the reality of Richard Milhouse Nixon was he was a little bit of a kook. You know, he would sneak out of the White House and go meet with protesters without the Secret Service. You're not going to see anybody doing that today. Why wouldn't he go take his golf buddy and show him something? But the argument is, what did you see? I know what you think you saw, but what did you actually see? And was it part of misinformation? Because there's just so much of that involved in this era. Did Muhammad Ali see a UFO? I'm positive he did. Was it a bomber? I don't know. You know, so I mean, welcome to part of our culture. We just don't have a definitive answer. And I'm not really willing to jump up and say, hey, the Saturnians are here. Because again, I go back to, you were good enough to get here and you wrecked as soon as you flew over Texas. I don't think so. You know, it was an experimental craft. Was something going on? Was there misinformation involved? Sure. So you kind of see where my brain is on this. Is it?
No, and I agree. It makes sense. I mean, of course, there are experimental planes, rockets, what have you, that they're testing, oftentimes out in the desert. Muhammad Ali was out in Las Vegas a lot. I mean, a lot of this is going on.
Not too far from Area 51.
Right. You've got military posts out there. You've got secret things going on. So that explains the vehicles. That explains, unidentified flying object. We don't know what it is, but there could be a logical explanation for it.
Right.
But then you've got the people who actually make contact. There are people like Calvin Parker, Jackie Gleason. Well, Jackie Gleason's the ones he made contact with. They were dead. They were supposedly
that he saw, but he can't.
People supposedly saw.
And say, Jackie, go see what's in it.
Supposedly they were in there. They were like little things lying on the table, like a morgue. It was like a morgue of these little beings. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in Area 51 somebody saw little dead beings in there. Aren't there people who claim to have seen?
But that seems so much easier.
Scenario. What's that?
But it just seems so much easier to fake for misinformation purposes.
Well, let's take a little break, and we're going to come back, and I'll buy the thing about the vehicles, but let's talk more about these little people. And in Calvin Parker's case, what he saw on that ship was not so little.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be back.
Follow me, Kalila Smith, into the mysterious world of spirits. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, is a concise how-to manual for anyone who enjoys a good ghost hunt. Learn the history of spiritualism, learn what a ghost is and what is not. Learn the truth about poltergeist. We'll also delve into the realm of spiritual beings that never were human, the world of demons, real vampires, and we'll look at some real case studies. This is a must-have for everyone interested in ghost hunting, from the novice to the expert. Completely updated in its second edition, this is one of the first guides for ghost hunting based on actual first-hand experiences. Available on Amazon.com. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, by Kalila Smith.
All right, we're back. So, Alan, come on now. That's a great explanation. We're on the same page. But, okay, so let's assume Jackie Gleason was taken to a place. He's taken to a military boat. I mean, first off, that's a very elaborate prank to play on somebody. Now, granted, Nixon probably had the funds and the things available to him to do it. And who knows, if he was a big prankster, maybe it was worth it to him. But
well, I don't think it was a prank. I think it was a actual intent to get that story out through a semi-credible source and a really famous, massive celebrity like Jackie Gleason. One, he's a celebrity and he's an actor, so he's easy to discredit, or just the military can go, really? We showed an actor a body? Seriously? However, because of his clout around the world at the time, people would listen. If you were a foreign power, you would be having the same argument you and I are having right now, going, why would Jackie Gleason? Well, I mean, honestly, I mean, you think,
why would he lie? Why would Jackie Gleason?
Why would he lie?
He has no reason to lie.
And he would be the perfect foil, because he doesn't have to have credibility in space or science or anything. He's a major celebrity.
But do you think he saw dead aliens? I mean, what do you think he saw?
I think he saw something.
Well, he did see
I don't
something.
think he saw a dead alien.
Well, what do you think it was? Do you think it was like costumes? Do you think it was a Halloween prop? I mean, what do you think it was?
I think it was a carefully constructed plan of disinformation.
But why? What would be the motive? What would, a joke?
No, it's not a joke. It would be to possibly, all right, it's going to be sleight of hand. So the U.S. government, Richard Nixon, the military, whatever, they're up to A. So we've got A we're trying to get away with, but we know we're being watched. Spies, other such.
So a diversion.
We know we're being watched. So what we're going to do over here is we're going to put up B. And we're going to play off this Roswell thing. And we're going to say that, yeah, we got a few of them. And notice we're going to be working on the aircraft over here, but we're going to have this happen way over here on this side of the country. And if you're a foreign power, you can't afford to ignore this.
Okay.
You
so
can't
you think it was just a diversion? Something, we're going to create something over here to bring attention to this so that nobody's paying attention to what's going on over there.
Just
Makes sense?
considering the political time and considering the players, that seems the most logical possible scenario.
Okay, well, it's feasible. It's possible. I mean, it could be possible, but I think it's a horrible prank that he would have played on Jackie Gleason, who was supposed to be a good friend. I mean, and basically played on his.
And politics makes strange bedfellows. Yes.
No, yeah, I don't know. I'm not very political, but I mean, it just seems like if they're friends, you're kind of like mocking him because he believed in. Jackie Gleason believed in the paranormal. Jackie Gleason believed in UFOs. Jackie Gleason believed that there was,
the perfect foil.
Aliens. Yeah. Well,
thus
the
perfect foil.
All right, it makes sense.
That just seems to be this logical point of view.
Okay, but we still have Mr. Calvin Parker of Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Yes, we do.
He and his buddy, who after work innocently just went like they normally do, and they went fishing out on the river.
Mm-hmm.
And what he described is the usual big, massive light, big vehicle. But he is physically, and his buddy, two people that witnessed this, he's physically taken aboard a spaceship. And what he describes is that he had medical experiments performed on him. He's lying on a table. He's fully awake.
Mm-hmm.
He's watching. He describes in great details some of these beings, and some of the stuff he says, it's very elaborate. I mean, there's one being, and he senses that it's a female. These things don't even look like humans, but these things were big. These were not little green people. They were not little gray people that a lot of people describe. This one was not
a cute dream.
No, this was quite terrifying. What he describes, he said one of them was very tall, and it communicated with him telepathically. Like there's communication going on without speaking. And it could happen. It happens all the times with people. So, it could happen. But he's describing this, and he's watching. Not only is he experiencing, he's having his experience here, he can look over there and see his buddy also having something done to him by these creatures.
Mhm.
And then they wake up and it's over, and it's like, okay, they agree that they both experienced. Now, if one person experienced something, it could be a dream, but you have two people at the same time who agree this happened.
Mm-hmm.
I saw this, you saw this. I felt this, you felt this.
The whole missing time syndrome, everything.
The missing time syndrome, the whole thing. And if you listen to the police interview, and Calvin Parker today, he says today the one thing he regrets is that when they went to the police station, he didn't want to say anything. He was terrified to say anything. He thought people were going to think he's crazy.
Yeah.
And the gentleman he was with was older than him, and that guy was telling his story, but Calvin didn't want to say anything. He kind of freaked out, and he was just kind of like, I'm gonna keep this to myself. And he wished he would have given more information then. But I mean, he has carried this with him for 40-something years, and then finally, he wasn't out to make money. He wasn't out to write a novel. Right. Decades later, he has a second experience. And people knew about his experience because it was publicized. Mm-hmm. And he happened to go somewhere. Somebody invites him to like a con, one of these convention things that you and I go to frequently. And he happens to be there. And there's this group there. And they're like, hey, you're Calvin Parker. And he's like, yeah, I'm Calvin Parker. And they suggested to him that he write a book. And he went home. And he discussed it with his wife. I don't know. I don't know if I want to do this. And he literally went and locked himself in a room and he wrote his book. And he even told the publisher, the one thing that I insist upon is you do not edit. If I misspell something, you leave it misspelled. My words are my words. My experience is my experience, and you alter nothing. And that's how it was published. Mm-hmm. So, and I mean, he became very famous because of this incident. And then like 20 years after it happened, he had another incident happen again. This guy was not looking for notoriety. This guy was not looking to get rich. This guy stood nothing to gain from this. He just shared an experience. And to this day, he cannot explain it. So what is as a skeptic, what do you say about that? What do you say? Because I believe him. I believe Calvin Parker had that experience. What he said happened. I don't know why it happened. I don't know where it came from. I'm thinking interdimensional beings rather than, I don't know. I have no explanation for it. I don't know. But I truly believe that he truly believes, and he knows that he had this experience, and I believe him.
Well, the problem with all abductions is generally right out of the hat a complete lack of physical evidence. And while that is telling, it's not the end of the story, because a lot of things can be done to you and there be no physical evidence because somebody cleans you up, puts you back together, and puts you back where they found you. There's a reflex in humans called sleep paralysis, which basically keeps us from rolling off the bed, falling out of the tree, whatever. If this misfires in the brain and you are lucidly dreaming, you are also now trapped and cannot move. So we have mechanisms in the brain that could function out of order and begin to create much of the scenario. And there were a few psychological experiments in the 10-year ago range where by manipulating oxygen content, you could actually create many of these effects. People would think that they were surrounded by some kind of being, or you could induce a lot of the same feelings and a lot of the same mental effects of an alien abduction. And as you and I both know from folklore, there was the old hag. And the old hag, or the old hag experience, is something has entered the room and now you can't move and there's nothing you can do about it. the old, quote unquote, the old hag has you. We can go back to the ancient Greeks, and an incubus or succubus has gotten hold of you. So now this otherworldly creature has entered your life and is fiddling about with you, and you can't move or cry out or do anything about it. So there are similar experiences throughout human history that could loosely be considered this type of event. And I think the type of event evolves with the level of technology of the person experiencing it. Am I ever going to say somebody didn't have the experience? Absolutely not. If you lucidly dreamed it that hard, then you have a memory stuck in your head, created or not, that affects your behavior and does things to you.
But they were not sleeping now. They were wide awake and they were fishing.
Well,
I mean, they weren't sleeping. They were awake and they were
felt
on
that
the
they
river.
were wide awake. A lot of people in lucid dreams have felt wide awake. I tell you, I was wide awake, and then I blacked out, and I woke up over here. So, the difficult part about this is so much of an alien abduction can be reproduced medically. But, again, that still leaves a hole in the explanation.
Yeah.
Why this person?
Why would somebody do that to someone?
Yeah.
Why would somebody go to that extreme?
And and horribly, if you watch the Discovery Channel, a lot of alien abductions look a lot like us tagging and tracking animals in the wild.
It could be. But I still think that these things, I think it's, we're just about out of time though, Alan, as usual. But, we're going to have to say we're going to have to say to be continued on this subject. So if anybody out there has a story, if you have a UFO story, if you have an alien abduction story, let us know about it on the chat room. We have a chat room on Facebook. Scary Stories with Kalila, the group. We have the page. Go and like it and send us your experience and your scary story to scarieststories@yahoo.com. But we will see you again next time. Have a pleasant night.